They said the bodies were not torn apart, and that was the first thing that did not make sense because whatever hunted in the hills beyond the village did not leave marks like teeth or claws. It left them broken, not cut, not bitten, but crushed, in a way that made it seem as if something had taken hold of them and simply pressed until there was nothing left inside. And when Ronan Vorn reached the first site, he understood why no one had gone back there. Since the ground was undisturbed, the grass flattened only where the body had fallen, and what remained of it lay twisted in place. The bones beneath the skin collapsed inward, as if they had given way, under sudden overwhelming force. The chest sunken, the limbs bent at angles that did not match the way they had been placed, and Ronan crouched beside it, his gaze steady as he examined the surface, because the truth was always in what remained untouched, and what he saw confirmed it. There were no cuts, no tears, no signs of struggle, only pressure applied in a single moment, strong enough to break everything at once and then released just as quickly. A faint indentation marked the ground beside the body. Then not deep, not obvious but present, a shape that did not match any natural track, not the print of a foot, not the drag of a body, but something wider, something that had pressed down with force and then lifted cleanly away. And Ronan rose slowly, his hand moving to the hilt of his blade, because whatever had done this did not feed the way animals did. It did not tear, it did not consume, it broke and left, and that meant the act itself mattered more than the result. He followed the direction of the disturbed grass into the hills, where the ground grew uneven, the path narrowing between low stone ridges that limited movement without fully blocking it. And the air there felt different, quieter, heavier, as if the sound itself did not travel as far. And that was when he heard it. Not loud, not clear, but present. A dull, metallic echo, carried faintly on the wind. A slow grinding noise followed by a sharp impact that did not belong to stone or wood, and Ronan stopped for a moment, his head turning slightly to catch the direction, because that sound was not random. It came in intervals, measured, controlled, as if something repeated the same motion again and again, and he moved toward it without hesitation, stepping between the ridges where the light faded slightly, the shadows deeper in the narrow spaces, and the ground beneath his boots. Harder here, more compact, as if something had passed through it, repeatedly pressing it down over time, and the sound came again, louder, now closer. The metallic grind followed by the same sharp impact, and then silence. And as he rounded the next bend, he saw it. The remains of another body positioned differently, this time not fallen, not collapsed but set against the stone as if it had been placed there, the shape intact, but the chest crushed inward. The stone behind it cracked slightly from the force, and Ronan's eyes narrowed because that meant the pressure was not just enough to break bone. It was enough to transfer through it into what lay behind, and that required something far beyond natural strength. A second indentation marked the ground nearby, then deeper than the first, the shape clearer. Now a curved edge pressed into the soil, as if something with a solid, rigid surface had closed around the body, and then released. And Ronan stepped back half a pace, his stance lowering because now he understood this was not a creature that struck with claws or teeth. This was something that clamped, something that closed around its target with force designed to crush rather than tear. And the sound came again, then closer than before, the metallic grind, sharper, now followed by a heavy impact that echoed between the stone ridges, and Ronan turned toward it immediately, his blade already in hand, because whatever made that sound was near, close enough now that the next movement would not be hidden by distance, and the ground ahead shifted. Slightly, not a ripple, not a rise, but a subtle change in pressure, as if something heavy had settled just out of sight beyond the ridge, and Ronan Vorn stepped forward without hesitation. Because whatever hunted here did not rely on speed or stealth. It relied on precision, on control, and when it struck, it would not miss. And as the sound came one final time, louder than before, the metal grinding against itself, before snapping shut, Ronan prepared to meet it, because whatever emerged next would not give him a second chance to react if he failed to understand it. In the first moment it revealed itself, Ronan did not rush forward after the sound stopped, because whatever produced it had already shown him enough to understand that this was not something that lunged blindly. It chose its moment, it measured its strike, and anything that acted with that kind of control would not reveal itself without purpose. So he moved along the ridge instead, keeping the stone between himself and the last point, where the sound had come from his steps. Quiet his blade low but ready, because the first contact would decide everything. And as he reached the edge of the rock, the air shifted slightly, the silence tightening as if something nearby had become aware of him. And then it moved. Not from ahead, not from the open ground, but from the side, the stone beside him shuddering for a fraction of a second, before something struck against it from the other side, a heavy metallic impact that cracked the surface and sent fragments outward. And Ronan stepped back, immediately creating space as the shape emerged around the edge of the ridge. Not rising, not leaping, but sliding into view with deliberate control, and for a moment it seemed too simple, too compact. A low, heavy body supported by short, reinforced limbs. The surface of it dark and rigid, not like flesh, not like bone, but something closer to metal, something that reflected light in dull, uneven patches. And then it opened the front of its form, and Ronan saw the truth. The maw, not a mouth in the natural sense, but a structure built to close two curved plates, lined with jagged edges, snapping apart with a grinding sound that echoed through the narrow space. And when it shut again, the impact was sharp, final. The same sound he had heard before, and Ronan did not hesitate. He stepped to the side as it lunged, the motion sudden and precise, the maw snapping shut, exactly where he had stood a moment before, the force of it cracking the ground beneath, and the creature did not stop it, adjusted immediately. The plates opening again with that same grinding motion, before snapping shut in a second strike, aimed to catch him mid-step, and Ronan turned into it. This time, his blade striking the outer edge of the maw in a controlled deflection. The steel meeting resistance unlike anything he had felt before. Not flesh, not bone, but something harder, something that did not give under pressure. And he pulled back immediately, because now he understood this thing did not rely on speed alone. It relied on inevitability, on the fact that once it committed to a strike, it would follow through with enough force to break anything caught within it. The creature advanced again, its movement low and steady, its limbs carrying it forward with a weight that pressed into the ground, leaving shallow impressions with each step. And the maw opened once more, the grinding sound louder now as it prepared another strike. And Ronan shifted his stance lower, his grip tightening on the blade, because this would not be a fight of cutting through a body. There was nothing here that could be cut. Not in the way he needed. The creature struck again, then faster this time. The maw snapping shut in a tight arc aimed to catch him from the side, and Ronan stepped back just enough to avoid it. The impact striking the stone behind him with enough force to crack it further. Fragments breaking away from the ridge as the plates closed, and he saw it then, in the moment, before it opened again. The slight delay, the brief pause. Where the structure reset, where the plates separated and realigned before the next strike. And that was the opening. Not in the body, not in the form, but in the motion itself. The creature lunged again, immediately, the maw opening and closing in rapid succession, each strike slightly offset from the last, as if adjusting to his movement, predicting where he would be rather than where he was. And Ronan moved constantly, his steps precise, his blade deflecting only when necessary, because direct contact would not stop it. Not the way it should, and the space around them tightened with each exchange. The narrow ridge limiting his movement, the stone walls closing in on both sides. And that was when the second shape moved. Not in front of him, not beside him, but behind the sound of another metallic grind echoing through the space, as a second maw opened in the shadows beyond the ridge, and Ronan felt the shift immediately. This was not a solitary hunter. This was a pair or more working in coordination. The first pressing him forward, the second waiting to close the path behind. And the realization settled cold and immediate. This thing did not chase it. Positioned it forced its prey into a space where escape was no longer possible. And then it ended it in a single motion. And as the first creature advanced again, its maw opening for another strike, while the second began to move into position behind him, Ronan Vorn tightened his grip on the blade, because now the fight had changed from survival to control. If he allowed them to complete the trap, there would be no way out, and whatever came next would not leave him time to correct that mistake. The space between the ridges narrowed with every step Ronan took, and that was when he understood the trap was not just in the creatures, but in the ground itself, the stone guiding movement, the angles forcing direction, until there was only one path left, and the first maw advanced steadily, its grinding jaws opening and closing in measured intervals, each strike placed. Not where he stood, but where he would be if he continued forward, and the second moved behind him, its presence marked by the same metallic echo that bounced between the stone walls and filled the space with a rhythm that pressed in from both sides. And Ronan did not retreat, because retreat would only close the gap faster. He stepped forward instead, breaking the line. They tried to force him into his blade, striking against the edge of the first maw again, not to stop it, but to redirect the angle of the strike, forcing it to close against stone instead of flesh. And the impact shattered part of the ridge beside him, fragments falling away under the force. And that was when he saw it clearly. Not in the body, not in the form, but in the pattern. The creatures did not adjust after the strike. They followed through completely every time, committing to the motion, even when it meant striking the environment rather than him. And that was the weakness, not in what they were made of, but in how they acted. They could not stop. Once they began, they could not redirect. Once the maw closed, it would complete the motion, regardless of what lay between it and the target. The second maw struck then from behind the plates, snapping shut, where he had stood a moment before. The impact cracking the ground, and Ronan stepped between the two of them, using the narrow space to force their angles to intersect. And the first reacted immediately, its maw opening wide as it lunged forward again. The second following in sequence, their movements overlapping in a precise pattern designed to leave no gap, no moment to escape. And Ronan moved at the last possible second, turning sharply to the side, as the first maw snapped shut just short of him, and the second closed a fraction. Too late, the edges of their strikes nearly intersecting. And the sound that followed was different. Not the clean impact of bone breaking or stone cracking, but a heavy metallic collision as the edge of one struck the other. The force of it, sending a vibration through the ground beneath his feet, and for a moment, both paused. The plates locked together for a fraction of a second before separating again, and Ronan saw it clearly. Then the delay longer than before, the reset slower, as if the impact had disrupted the alignment within the structure. And that was the truth. They were not invulnerable. They were rigid, controlled by a mechanism that required precise alignment to function. And when that alignment was broken even briefly, their movement faltered. The first maw recovered quickly, though its plates grinding apart as it reset the structure, shifting slightly as it prepared to strike again. But the second lagged behind its movement, delayed by a fraction that would not have mattered before, but mattered now. And Ronan stepped toward it, immediately closing the distance before it could fully recover his blade, driving into the narrow gap between the plates as they began to open, forcing the edge into the seam where the structure met, and the resistance was immense but not absolute. The steel catching just enough to disrupt the motion, the plates halting mid-open as the internal alignment failed, and the creature reacted violently, the entire body convulsing as if trying to force the mechanism to complete its cycle. And Ronan ripped the blade free, stepping back as the maw snapped shut again. But this time, the motion was uneven, the impact weaker than before, the precision gone for a moment, and the first creature advanced again. Its movement unchanged, its pattern still intact, its maw opening for another strike. But now Ronan understood everything he needed to know. This was not a creature in the way others had been. It was a construct of motion of force, something that relied entirely on the completion of its strikes. And if that completion was interrupted, if the alignment within it was broken even briefly, it became vulnerable not in its outer form, but in the way it functioned, and the ground beneath them cracked again as the creatures moved the ridges, breaking under repeated impacts, the space widening slightly as the stone gave way, and Ronan adjusted his position immediately, because this was no longer about avoiding their strikes, it was about forcing them to strike each other to disrupt their own movement, until the mechanism that drove them failed completely. And as both maws opened at once, their grinding echo filling the narrow pass, Ronan Vorn stepped into the center of their path, not to evade, but to draw the strike, because the next moment would decide whether he could turn their own force against them or be caught between it and crushed the same way the others had been left behind in the hills, with nothing but broken bone and silent ground. To mark where they had fallen, Ronan did not step away, as both maws opened at once, because stepping away would only return the fight to what it had been, before controlled strikes narrowing space until there was nowhere left to move. and he had already seen enough to understand that this would not end by avoiding them. It would end by breaking the pattern that drove them. So he stepped forward instead, directly into the center of their path, forcing the distance closed, before either could adjust. The first maw lunging from the front, its plates snapping open wide, the grinding echo sharp in the confined space, while the second surged from behind. Its motion, slightly delayed from the earlier disruption but still precise enough to complete the trap if allowed, and Ronan held his ground for a fraction of a second longer than instinct allowed, watching the angle of both strikes, measuring the exact moment where their paths would intersect, and then he moved not back, not to the side, but forward and down his body, dropping low as the first maw snapped shut, just above him, the force of it cracking the stone where he had stood, while the second closed from behind, the timing off by only a fraction, but enough the edges of their strikes colliding with a heavy metallic impact that echoed through the ridge. The sound deeper this time, more violent, as the force of both mechanisms met head-on. And for a moment, neither opened. The plates locked together, the alignment broken, the structures grinding against each other as they tried to reset, and Ronan moved, immediately rising from the ground and stepping toward the nearest one, his blade driving into the seam between the plates where they met, forcing the edge into the point of contact where the alignment had already failed, and the resistance was immense but unstable. The steel catching within the gap as the creature tried to force the motion closed again, and he twisted hard, driving the disruption deeper into the mechanism beneath. And the reaction was immediate. The maw shuddering violently, the plates jerking out of sync as the internal structure failed to complete the cycle. And Ronan ripped the blade free, stepping back as the second maw broke away from the collision. Its movement slower, now less precise, the earlier impact having carried through its structure, and he did not give it time to recover. He stepped into it as well, his blade striking the same point between the plates as they began to open again, forcing the edge into the seam and disrupting the alignment before the motion could complete. And this time, when it tried to close the plates, did not meet cleanly, one side locking before the other, the force uneven, the impact weaker, and the entire body of the creature shifted slightly, as if the balance had been lost, and Ronan saw it clearly. Both of them, now their movements no longer synchronized, no longer precise, the pattern broken, the inevitability gone, and he stepped back, creating just enough distance to force them to act again. Because they would not stop. They could not stop their nature. Drove them to complete the strike. And as both maws opened once more, their grinding echo, uneven now, lacking the perfect rhythm they had held, before Ronan positioned himself deliberately between them. Again, not as bait, but as a point of convergence. Forcing their angles to cross, and when they lunged, he moved at the last possible moment, turning sharply to the side, as both snapped shut, and this time the collision was not partial, not glancing, but full the edges of their plates, meeting directly, with all the force they carried, the impact cracking the stone beneath them, and the sound that followed different from before, a deeper fracture, a break within the mechanism itself. And one of the maws did not open. Again, the plates locked at an angle, the alignment completely lost, while the other staggered its movement, halting for a moment, before attempting to reset the plates, grinding unevenly as it tried to regain control. And Ronan stepped in without hesitation, his blade driving into the exposed seam of the damaged one, twisting hard within the broken alignment, and the structure gave way. The plates separating not in motion, but in collapse. The internal force that held them together, failing completely, and the body stilled the mechanism, dead, no longer able to move, no longer able to close, and he turned immediately to the second, as it struggled to reset its motion, its plates opening unevenly, the alignment still compromised from the last collision, and he drove the blade into the same point, forcing the disruption before it could recover. And the creature reacted with one final attempt to strike the plates, snapping shut, but not cleanly. The motion incomplete, the force uneven, and Ronan twisted the blade again, driving the failure deeper, until the movement stopped entirely, the structure locking in place, the mechanism broken beyond recovery, and the silence that followed was absolute. The metallic echo gone, the grinding absent, the narrow pass between the ridges, still once more. And Ronan stood there for a moment longer, his breathing steady, his gaze fixed on the remains, because he needed to be certain, needed to see that nothing within them would move again. And when they did not, he lowered his blade, slowly, stepping back from the broken forms as the dust settled around them, the cracked stone no longer shifting the ground, no longer carrying the vibration that had marked their presence. And he turned away from the ridge without looking back, because whatever had driven them, whatever had created something that moved with such force and precision, had been broken here, and for now, that was enough. The hills would remain quiet. The bodies would not return in the same broken state, and the silence would hold until something else found a way to disturb it again. Somewhere else where the sound of metal grinding would come before anyone understood what it meant. And by then, it would already be too late.